Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. It's such an honor and a pleasure being able to record the Lift Your Legacy podcast. And if you're also getting value from this podcast, please consider supporting an episode. We at Lift Your Legacy are working very hard to turn out weekly, high-value content and would love your support. So for sponsoring an episode or for advertising, please email rabbirupp@gmail.com, RABBIRUPP@gmail.com. I'm so excited today to have Judy Gruen, who is the author of the newly released The Skeptic and the Rabbi, Falling in Love with Faith. Her work is all over the place: Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, H.com. She's been writing for 35, 40 years. And what we get into in this interview is not only her very insightful and fascinating story about how she found more observant Judaism and the lessons that she was able to put into her own life, but also her take on the Jewish world and the world at large, some of the challenges that we have, the situation around dating. She writes a lot about media, and we also get into what it's like to actually be an author and to be a writer and to be someone that is promoting and pushing content into the world that is meant to shape and inspire the future. So with no further ado, I give you Judy Gruen. Judy Gruen, I appreciate you coming on the show today. I read your book. I absolutely loved your book. I'd like to show the cover of the book. Unfortunately, I've already shared it with about 3 people who I wanted to read it, so I don't physically have the copy. It's called The Rabbi and the Skeptic. It's about your personal journey. Were you thinking, what's the message and who's the audience of this phenomenal memoir?
I wanted the book to dispel misconceptions and hope that perhaps some Jews who are not, I'll just say Orthodox in quotes, might not think that we're so crazy after all. To show the thought process and the struggle and the humor in the road that I have taken, and not just me, many tens of thousands of people in the last couple of generations have done this. But more than that, not just for Jews, and I'm so gratified. I am hearing from non-Jewish people, including last night. I heard from somebody who is an Indian immigrant who said that he is a first-generation American finding his way with his God, and how much my book strengthened him. A big part of my message is don't be afraid to question the status quo. And when the status quo in our society is very much pushing people toward letting go of tradition and embracing secularism, part of my message is don't be afraid to rethink that and think, where is the road that's going to lead me to a more fulfilled life, a more connected life, a deeper life, a richer life?
One of the extremely difficult parts of your story that you speak about in the book was losing your brother. And one of the major struggles that a lot of us encounter in the process of becoming more spiritual is, how do you rectify these, unspeakable tragedies, or even on a lower level, disappointments with God? And how do we try to take that tragedy and plug it into a faith that we're trying to develop?
So it leads into the question of why do bad things happen to good people? How do we deal with pain? How do we make peace with a God who has to give us free choice, but also seems to let an awful lot of terrible things happen? The best answer that I can begin to understand, and I emphasize begin to understand, is that this world that we are living in, it's real to an extent. It counts, it matters, we have to make the most of it, but it's not the only life that we have. Our souls live on forever. And as I write in that very difficult chapter about losing my brother, one of the reasons that later on I felt that I needed to explore traditional Jewish philosophy and practice was because growing up in the conservative movement, I didn't even know that the idea of an immortal soul was a Jewish idea. I knew that my Christian friends believed in it. How did I know that Christians and Catholics believed in it? And I didn't know that we, my own people, my own religion, my grandfather was a rabbi, for goodness sake. How did I not know that? And I can tell you that as a young child, having suffered along with my entire family the catastrophic and sudden loss of my brother, it would not have, of course, brought him back, but it would have helped at least a little. It would have been a bit of a balm on the pain to think, well, we don't have him anymore, but his soul is living on. He is in, gone to his eternal reward, or however you want to say it. That would have really been very helpful. And I resented the fact that had gotten dropped from the syllabus somewhere along the line. There's just so much that we cannot understand in this life. We just can't. But we also see miracles every day, and it's very easy to focus on all the things that go wrong without even giving a quarter of the amount of attention to all the beautiful things that go right.
One of the things that you speak about in your book as well is as a very proud, progressive person that you were writing, and you had went to great schools and growing up on the West Coast and coming from a proud line of, very activist and sort of, progressive people. You were trying to struggle with traditional Judaism and your own, I guess you could say, feminine sense of empowerment. How have you made that work as of late?
I am very fortunate because I've always been a writer. I've been a writer for 35 years. How can that be? I'm not that old, right? But I am, and I have a voice that goes out to the public. And so I understand that for a lot of women, it can be more challenging, or that they feel that they don't have enough of a voice. But I think that that's changing. And I have really never felt it for the two reasons. Number one, I've always had a voice and I've been able to get it out there. And that's a very fortunate thing. And also, I didn't join a community where women were really not seen and basically not heard. But since I finished the book and I had to focus on the important work of promotion, I have learned a lot. And I have learned that there is so much happening even deep within the more, what you might want to call the more insular areas of Orthodoxy, communities that I was never a part of and that would not have drawn me in. But women are doing amazing things. Orthodox women are doing unbelievable things in leadership, in writing, in teaching, in speaking. They're on social media. It's not like even I thought it was a year ago. Things are changing.
When you write, what's that experience like? What are you feeling when you're writing? How do you know if what you're writing is good? How are you taking the concepts that you have and putting it down on paper? Talk to me a little bit about what it's like to be an artist at work when you write.
Whoa. I don't like to consider myself as an artist, because to me, an artist conjures up images of somebody who's very, touchy and, egotistical. And I'm not saying that there's no ego involved in my work. That would be really a big lie. There is. Okay. But I learned from journalism school, my first editor said, you cannot be jealous of your own work. That's exactly what he said. And I never forgot that. And I thought, you know what? You just have to be willing to take criticism, constructive criticism, and go with it. And all these decades into my career, I still look for that constructive criticism. This is my fourth book, actually my fifth if I count the business book I co-wrote with my good friend Linda Abraham about MBA admissions. This book was so completely different than anything I'd ever done. My first three books were humor books, and I love my humor books, and I worked hard on them, and they're nice and they're clean, and I think they're sophisticated, and I think they have value. But they're not important books. They're nice books. I wanted The Skeptic and the Rabbi, Falling in Love with Faith, to be an important book, a book that would last, that if God forbid, for some reason I couldn't write any other books after this, that this book would speak for me and what I had been able to become over the course of time. But I had to rip out a lot of stitches over and over again before I got this right. And my first several drafts were not very good. And I showed them to people who affirmed this. They said, Judy, you know, this is, you're a pretty good writer, but this isn't it. So I really worked it and worked it and worked it. I hired editors who were not Jewish. I specifically chose non-Jewish editors to look at what I was trying to do, because I so much wanted the book to be accessible to certainly a non-Orthodox audience and even beyond a non-Jewish audience. So it's a labor of love. And many times I lost sleep. I got bad headaches. I broke down and cried many times, especially writing about my brother, which I didn't think would still be so intense after 45 years. I mean, I was a young child, and I thought, I'm, more or less over it. I had no idea how much was still there. It was really, I learned so much, and I'm very grateful for the experience of this book. And I'm always energized when I write, and I always feel like I meant to do this, and I love seeing how I can take my work to the next level.
The first way I heard about you was not the book, but rather that you were writing very compelling articles on H.com that were really dealing with a lot of the modern challenges of the day. A few questions. First of all, as a former rabbi living in Los Angeles myself, becoming observant myself, working in outreach, I saw your memoirs as a very I don't want to call it, in a lot of ways, it's like how I sort of view the 50s is like this ideal time of people sort of reconnecting with their faith, with Rabbi Lapin on the beach over there. Do you feel that outreach and Jewish awareness has changed? Has it gotten, how has it changed from when you and your husband were going through it initially? And what do you think is the approach that would work for this generation, or is it the same?
It's not the same, but being part of an H community for so many years and writing for H.com, I've spoken to many people, and their approach has to be very different in this generation. To attract younger people, they need to make events that are fun, rock climbing, sushi nights, movie nights. When we were young, there was much more of a thirst among young people for meaning, outright meaning. It's harder to get to that. There's small baby steps, that I see people taking, and it's very alarming because very recently there was some surveys done of college students who are Jewish, and most of them don't even call themselves Jewish. They don't associate themselves with Jewish. The baseline Jewish identity that was a given, even for secular Jews, and I was never completely secular. I was always involved in Jewish journalism on college campus. Hillel, I had Jewish involvement. It just wasn't religious. It wasn't Torah based. But even my friends who didn't have that, there was just a baseline that was there. And that's missing now. And I hope that my book will be able to reach some people who are young enough to be my kids, and that they won't hold it against me that I'm old enough to be their mother, because I was where they were, in a sense, and wanting to just kind of make my mark on the world and not really thinking about making my mark on eternity.
As a provider of content, you're speaking about very real and deep things. Do you find it frightening that's just not going to go to the generation, or that there has to be a certain level or bar of entry? Or is that why specifically you start with concepts, like the article that you just wrote about Larry David, or about, the dating crisis? If you're picking something like that, is that sort of like an in to this generation that perhaps wouldn't have been necessary back in the day when you were starting your journey?
I have to remind myself that part of being Jewish is being optimistic. and living in the times that we live in, which are very frightening on many, many levels. I have to remind myself, Hashem has a plan.
If you wrote a very compelling article about dating, tell me a little bit about what you perceive, what sort of brought this out that you wanted to write this article about dating and how women are sort of selling themselves short, not getting what they want long term. What made you think that? And what are you suggesting that men do in order to actually get what they want out of dating, as opposed to kind of going the conventional route that you're seeing?
What doesn't get talked about, and it makes me very angry, is the secular magazines, the magazines that are aimed at teenage girls, young women, older women. They don't tell the truth. They don't tell the truth at all about the pain that so many women, and not just women, but sensitive men also feel after hookups, after abortions. These are real things that are not talked about. And there's not just a psychological impact, fallout. There's physical. There are implications for women's fertility if they've had a lot of STDs and things. I wrote about that a couple of times. I wrote about it recently on Aish, one story about the hookup culture, and a few years before about Unprotected by Dr. Miriam Grossman, a book that was so controversial that she first had to publish it under the name Anonymous. And she was a campus psychiatrist at UCLA who was seeing the connection between easy sex and easy relationships with depression, lack of sense of alienation, cutting, all sorts of behaviors that are indications of terrible pain. That doesn't mean that everybody who has casual relationships is going to fall into the pits of depression, but people are not putting together the connections, and it makes me very, very angry. It shows how much of I'm sorry to say, but a left-wing secular agenda runs the secular media. And I feel like this is such an important thing. People are so concerned about additives and gluten, and right, it takes the FDA 10 years to approve a new food coloring, right? But you want to change the way families are structured? Who's doing any research on that? Yeah, go ahead. It's all feelings based, and it's disastrous.
So you're saying taking the clinical aspects out of this and not necessarily putting enough kind of research and having a background is the biggest challenge, that we've taken essentially human relationships and human psychology and no longer apply the basic scientific method. And that's kind of why things are falling apart. Or are they falling apart? Maybe, I mean, here's the real question that I pose a lot and is posed to me now. I met my wife in college. If it worked back in your day, you've been married for decades. I've been married for over a decade. If we just met our spouses while sort of living the life, why do we try, with our own children or when we advocate for those that we are trying to influence to sort of follow a more traditional Jewish background?
I just think that people open themselves to much more pain, and I think they open themselves to becoming desensitized. And the desensitization, I think, is just as damaging and just as dangerous as anything else. To be desensitized to what intimacy should be, could be. This is really, really, really damaging.
I had a conversation with a colleague of mine that we both worked with teenagers, and he was saying that he was just shocked that, he said even when he was a teenager, like the stuff that people are talking about is insane. And so I pointed out to him, it's like, whereas, even in our generation, like, you get introduced to certain things at a later age, kids that have smartphones, like it's how, as soon as you can put in a website, with 7. So, I guess it's a matter of also overexposure and exposure at a younger age, which makes it a much more relevant time, perhaps, to start advocating more strongly our messages, because kids are getting more and more wrapped up and it's becoming part of their ethos much earlier. Perhaps.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of parents are really lazy. I'm sorry to say it. I try not to say things that are critical of other people who I don't know, but you're making a big mistake if you're just handing your kids iPhones, smartphones, letting them be in front of screens. They gravitate toward it, and it's understandable. It's very compelling, but the fact that it's so compelling ought to be a warning. Let them play. In the same way that there's now a move toward mindfulness, and people are trying to eat clean, right? Again, it comes back to the point I made about in the physical world, people can understand and appreciate the need for a certain level of purity and simplicity, and they're not making the connection that we need the same thing in terms of our emotional and spiritual lives. We can't let everything in. It's making people crazy, and it's not making people happy.
Drawing on part of your book, also, when you were in the process of meeting your husband, it was very nice, and I sort of identified a lot of my past life with your story. That he was not like the off at the initial, he was not like your ideal catch, so to speak. And it was a process of getting to know each other. So maybe if you could tell the listeners, how would you advocate if you're kind of starting fresh, if a person is going into wanting to have a relationship, what would they do that works to sort of ensure that process of not getting desensitized, not sort of overcommitting yourself, but rather building for the long term?
One of the reasons that I really was so taken with my husband when I met him was that the first time we met, and I wrote about this, I didn't feel like I was on a date. I felt like I was meeting an old friend who I just hadn't met yet. It was so comfortable to be with him. We just talked and talked. And so often people feel that dates are awkward, and they can be very awkward. So I think you really want to be looking for somebody who is a friend, first of all, and see where you can build from that. And you have to have some values clarification going on. You need to have a shared vision. And yes, of course, you need physical attraction. You need chemistry. Absolutely, you do. But a lot of people are looking at it, going about it in the opposite direction. Is there chemistry first? Okay, great. And then they're very involved with each other, maybe physically, which means also emotionally. And then they realize, oh, you believe this? Oh, you believe that? What? Are you crazy? So I think you really want to look for the shared values and the shared vision. And can I trust this person with my real self? You're really looking for somebody who will be a best intimate friend, someone who, you've got to look at someone and think, do I want this person to be the mother of my children, the father of my children? Ask yourself this question. A lot of people just aren't asking the big questions early enough.
Do you think that a person should really be dating before they're asking those kind of questions? What I'm seeing more and more that, most people don't even consider, do I want this person long-term? Because they themselves are not thinking long-term when they start this process, and possibly don't even start thinking about long-term. I talked to a guy that was mid-40s and was not sure I eventually should settle down. So what do you think about that in terms of when it's the right time to ask those questions that you suggested about if I want to be with this person long-term?
People have very arrested development. But it's sad but true, but people just are not thinking about the big issues until later on. And a lot of them are men. I think that was something I covered in one of my recent stories on Aish. And women still, much more than young men, feel in their gut that they want to be married and have children. But the men, what's the rush? So look, people want to feel connected. They want to feel that somebody of the opposite sex is attracted to them. I don't like the word gender. I just hate that word. I'm not using it. So too bad. People want to feel connected, and they want to feel like they have somebody. I can't answer what people should or shouldn't do, but I think that people should think more carefully about how involved they get, how deeply they let themselves get enmeshed with somebody else, if it's not, for what purpose? To then just break up a year later, 3 years later, after they've lived together for 6 years, and then where are they? They've got to start all over, and it takes so much out of you. Ask anybody who's been dating and trying to get married. It's exhausting and it's draining, and it can lead to bitterness too. So there's no magic recipe. I would just say that people should just look at these kinds of things a little more seriously for their own self-preservation.
A major theme in your book was change and the dynamics of the family, and you had to worry about how you could embrace your inspired more, move to orthodoxy vis-a-vis your family personally. And then the book closed I hope it's not a surprise how the book closes, but about how your children almost take on a more quote unquote, a more right-wing version of the orthodoxy that you had and that you chose for your own life. And so the question really is, how does one grow in a way that's genuine to them, while at the same time maintaining positive relationships and then not stifling necessarily the growth of their children?
I think I used this line in the book, and I heard it from somebody in the world of Jewish outreach. I wish I could give credit, but I don't remember. But he said, you have to be Jewish to be Jewish. Too often, people who are attracted to becoming Torah observant can lose themselves in it, and that's a mistake. If you're an artist, still be that artist. Okay, there can be, difficulties. If you're this really happened. I knew a woman who was, she played an instrument for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and she wanted to become observant, but what was she going to do? Not play on Friday nights in the Philharmonic? It was a real crisis for her, and she couldn't cross that boundary. Those are painful, difficult questions, and I'm not saying what anybody should do, but I'm saying to the extent that you can still be yourself, you should be yourself with a mind towards self-improvement. One of the things that I was so attracted to in Rabbi Lapin's community was that the Torah that he presented was a Torah life that emphasized dignity, intellectual breadth, emotional honesty. That's not the case in every Jewish community. It also was a community that didn't emphasize materialism. There was such a beautiful blending of people who were of different economic strata in the community. It just felt so real and good. In terms of what you said about kids, I didn't forget. You know this, we're taught to teach every child according to his or her way. Much easier said than done. We have 3 sons and a daughter, and our sons, who are all close in age, all went to different high schools. That's also not possible unless you live in a very big Jewish community like Los Angeles, where you have the choice. But you can't try and cram every Jewish kid into the same little nook. And parenting is hard, but you really need to honor the individuality of your child. You need to also, if you can, trust your child as they get a little older and listen to what they're telling you. And don't ever let them feel that they can't speak to you honestly and say, even if it's, I really don't like keeping Shabbos, or I even hate keeping Shabbos. Let them feel that you are a safe place to say that, because there's too many kids in the Orthodox world who feel like that they're being, that they can't be who they are, that it's too narrow. Work with your kids.
Beautiful. Judy Gruen, the book is The Skeptic and the Rabbi, Falling in Love with Faith. How do people find you? How do people find more of what you're doing and get in touch with you?
Okay. Well, my book is available through Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble bought a lot of books. So please buy from Barnes & Noble. It's also, of course, available on Amazon. It's available through indie bookstores. We want to support our indie bookstores. You can catch up with what I'm doing on my website, judygruen.com. And I have most of the new writing I'm doing is on aish.com. And so look for me there. I've got about 150 articles, so you can stay busy there for a while if you wanted to.
There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.